I think that probably the biggest challenge the industry has right now, especially for the larger organizations, is the legacy systems that are in place for compliance and onboarding. We talked to a lot of banks, large tier ones, tier twos, that can't scale their businesses because they're taking in a lot of client data, corporate data, and then that gets funneled off to numerous suppliers. So there's no real automation at all. And we're really finding a lot of them are coming back saying, we can't even scale our businesses anymore. We can't be competitive because of these manual legacy processes in place that we have for merchant onboarding. So it's really, really becoming a challenge for the industry as a whole. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, I've run a number of different payments companies, and these underwriting teams could be hundreds and hundreds of people, where they're taking in an application form, and then that's sort of taking the KYC data, sending off to a KYC provider, getting the KYB information, sending off to a different provider, doing credit risk scores and everything else as well, to then sort of come back with a profile of that merchant and their risk categories. And that's a very, very manual process that takes sometimes weeks to do, and depending on complexity. I think also too, the biggest issue for the industry on the automation standpoint is a lot of missing documentation. So a client will be getting, or a merchant will be sending information into a bank or into a payments company, and they're missing proof of addresses, directors' passports, corporate documents, and so forth. So that process is really, really becoming a drawn out process involving not only the underwriting team, but the sales teams, etc. And when you start getting to these large tier one organizations that are processing millions and millions of individuals and corporations, that really bogs down the process and drags out that whole onboarding process. I think the industry is going through a very, very, very fundamental shift in how we operate, right? I think there's a huge, huge push to anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, suspicious activity, right? And I think that's going to grow. If you look at how compliance has shifted even in the last 5 years, you look at the industry as a whole, I think even when I was running payments businesses, my HR budget for compliance was probably 10% of my HR budget, five years ago more. Now it's probably 20%, and I don't see that changing. I think that's actually going to increase over time, where compliance, risk, onboarding is going to become critical. What's driving that? I think obviously regulation. I think as the governments put more and more regulation, more and more monitoring, PSD2, AML4, AML5, so forth, and that continues to increase, that'll continue to put more pressure on companies. But I think we're at this critical stage now as an industry where those manual processes of doing compliance are no longer sustainable. There's going to be a breaking point in the industry where revenues are getting squeezed, the cost of compliance is increasing, and you can see payments companies going, I can't afford to be in the business anymore because of the way the costs are increasing. So I think the change of regulation and how things are implemented is really a governments, companies, fintechs, all coming together to sort of figure a better way of doing this. Good question. I think especially the bigger banks that we speak to, and we talk to all industries. So our platform, in essence, does identification and verification globally of individuals and corporations. Right, so we go out, we're connected to numerous providers on a global basis that we can gather that information, verify it, confirm it, and then present that back to our clients in an automated manner to say here's all the customers, UBOs, directors, KYC, all the companies KYB, risk scoring, negative media, and provide them a singleized report that basically says, here's the profile of that company or individual that you've wanted to do, and then sort of the risk score beside it. That to me takes a lot of the heavy lift out of the underwriting team going out and manually doing that. Also, from our standpoint, our platform proactively speaks to their customers and says, look, these documents are still missing in your application form. You need to provide that to us, which then takes away that whole manual process of the underwriting team, phoning the client saying we're missing a passport, we're missing corporate docs. Our platform preemptively goes out and actually says to the merchant or the client, you need to provide this documentation so we complete your underwriting process. Not a good question. I think that's the $1 million question. So where do I think the industry is going to go? I think you're going to see a massive consolidation. You look at the number of companies, Visa, MasterCard, the schemes are buying, whether it's in payments, whether it's in compliance, regulation, a lot of reg tech going on right now, huge growth in that space. I think there's always going to be a lot of growth where investment money, for lack of a better word, is cheap today, right? There's a lot of money going out in the investment community for fintech. I think the biggest challenge the industry has right now is I think the industry is looking going, okay, great, now how are we going to become profitable? And I think that's going to pivot and shift, especially as there have been a number of failed IPOs in the last few months. I think some of these investment firms are going to go, we're still interested in investing in fintech, but what's your model to becoming revenue positive and revenue producing in your ROI? So I think there still will be growth in the industry, but I think it's going to be a different landscape than it is today. I think it's going to be very much driven by ROI and profitability rather than just an endless supply of dumping in hundreds of millions of dollars into non-profitable businesses.